Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final day of programming here at the U.S. Center. Very excited for our first event of the day, Just Transition Through Trade, Empowering Small Enterprises. It's my honor to invite to the stage our moderator, Vladimir Hernandez Lovato, the former bureau chief in Africa at BBC News.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone, and well done to the US Pavilion. I know it's your last day, so I'm sure it's been a lot of work going in, so yeah, congratulations on a great event. Why don't we do a little bit of applause to the team. So this is a really exciting session, I think. I think small businesses are key to everything that's being discussed at COP. They're really relevant, they're huge, they're part of the world, and they bring solutions, but there's lots to do. And I think a lot of people have been discussing the value of small businesses for months, for years now, and it's great that for the first time the Conference of Parties number 28 is now recognizing the importance of small businesses and what they can add to climate action. But it's not a simple sort of solution. There's lots to do. Small businesses, the vast majority, as you will hear from our esteemed panel, are very willing to sort of participate, join and take it. But skills are needed, capacity are needed, support from external sources, etc. But I'm not going to give away what I'm sure my fellow panel members will discuss about. So I just want to tee you all up to say that this will be a really interesting session. This is a solution to climate change, to tackle it via business, via trade. And I'm really interested to hear what our panelists will talk about this. But before we do that, we're going to watch a really interesting video, which I won't give away, but I'm going to take my seat so we can all enjoy it. Thank you.
In 2022, at COP27, a groundbreaking initiative was launched. The International Trade Center, in collaboration with the US Department of State, introduced the Climate Smart Network. Fast forward 1 year, and the Climate Smart Network has achieved remarkable milestones. Through collaboration with over 15 sustainability enablers, we've showcased and enhanced the visibility of over 60,000 climate-smart businesses. To further propel this initiative, the ITC issued a call to action in partnership with the Business Council for International Understanding BCIU and the Initiative for Compliance and Sustainability ICS. This call to action revolves around 5 key principles. At the launch event, ITC Executive Director Pamela Coke-Hamilton said these 5 principles, small business empowerment, sustainability, transparency, collaboration, and digitalization aren't just buzzwords. They are integral to changing how our supply chains work, making trade more sustainable, relationships more transparent, and partnerships along supply chains stronger. Following this call to action, over 70 brands, representing over 70% of the French textile and garment sector, have joined forces. They've signed up to connect with sustainable businesses through the UN Certified Business Registry, an extension of the ITC Standards Map. Today marks a groundbreaking announcement. 5 major global sustainability standard organizations in the textile and garment sector, Global Organic Textile Standard, Textile Exchange, Urcotex, Better Cotton, and Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production, are collaborating with the International Trade Center to share the sustainability credentials of tens of thousands of businesses. The Certified Business Registry has the potential to empower up to 1 million small businesses globally. Until now, separate databases weaken market access for SMEs seeking sustainable certification. Now, these major sustainability organizations are uniting to give more visibility to small businesses and enhance their market access. Today, at the US Center at COP28, we gather to discuss how to better engage small businesses in climate action, whether through the Climate Smart Network, or supporting actions aligned with our call to action, or through the Certified Business Registry. We can't leave small businesses behind. Let's work together for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future.
Thank you. I would like to invite our panel to join. Thomas Deba, please. I will introduce them one by one. Fiona, please, and then I will go through them. Abdul Rahman, Robin, and Lisa. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I would like to introduce you to my panel. First of all, we have next to me Thomas Deba. Debas. He's Managing Director for Global Partnerships at the State Department. We have Fiona Sheeran, my colleague at ITC, from the Division of Sustainable and Inclusive Trade, from the International Trade Center based in Geneva. Abdurrahman Saki El-Sahawi from Kubmena, an SME who has lots of interest and experiences to share with us, based in Cairo in Egypt. We also have Robin Anderson, the President of Emerging Ag, Inc., and Lisa Ventura, who's the Public Affairs Manager at Better Cotton. Welcome all. So I would like to start with you, Thomas, if that's okay. When we talk about the road towards climate mitigation and adaptation, what do you think is the role for international cooperation, and how does your global partnership team enable this?
Check. Yes. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to be back at the U.S. Center. I can't believe it's the last day. Whether you're talking about mitigation or adaptation, the need for collaboration is not a sense of inclusivity, but it's a necessity. And our office, the Office of Global Partnerships, is essentially designed with that framework in mind, that we alone, whether the U.S. government or any government alone, cannot address this systemic, wicked problem that we have called climate change. And so we've been working toward creating frameworks that enables organizations to work together. And we say partnerships, when it's broadly defined, not just we obviously have bilateral and multilateral type of relationships in terms of engaging with other donors or other governments. But frankly, the bulk of the relationship or the bulk of the partnerships that needs to be cultivated will be with the private sector. And private sector broadly defined, not just corporations, but faith-based groups, trade associations, essentially entire gamuts of society at large. And when you have that kind of mindset, the ability or the resources that you have to mobilize in order to address this issue becomes a lot more democratized, right? And so we're very bullish with the idea that we need to collaborate with anybody, with any entity, as long as our values are aligned, as long as our goals are aligned, we should be promoting that. I mean, you saw the video about the Climate Smart Network. That's a collaboration between our office and an ITC, because we recognize that we don't just work with the private sector. We also need to work with amazing organizations like ITC, who have amazing convening authority, and more importantly, they have the mandate to engage with small businesses. Frankly, when you are dealing with governments, it's very difficult to engage with small businesses because by the sheer size of who they are. So when you then work with entities like ITC, you're able to then engage small businesses in a meaningful way so they can earn the chair in this table called COP28. I was shocked. I remember having a conversation with Pamela 2 years ago or something like that about that small businesses are not represented well in COP. And I know Spec Carey, Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, when he championed that and ensured that so we could be here in these type of conversations. So we're very excited to collaborate with entities like ITC and the private sector in order to kind of advance this agenda we have. Because there's nothing small about small businesses. Okay, by themselves, they might be small, but if you create a collective action, a collective narrative, then I think significant amount of jobs around the world are created by small businesses. So how could you not engage with those type of entities? So it is with that genesis, it's with that context that GP and the Department of State leans forward and collaborate with kinds like ITC and others to do that.
Thank you, Thomas. And you're absolutely right. I think if my facts are correct, it's about 2/3 of the jobs in the world come from small businesses, huge amount. And it's great that COP is finally recognizing the role here, but it's also a little bit surprising that it hasn't happened before. But anyway, this is where we are. The present and the future is what matters. Fiona, I'm going to come to you now, and just to add, move this conversation further on. How would you say trade can be leveraged to achieve these climate goals with a just transition for small businesses?
Thanks very much, Vladimir. I would like to kind of maybe take a step back, because what we often have said in the past is that trade and climate don't go together. And I think at this COP, what I've seen, and more generally in our work at ITC, where we're trying to look at trade as a tool to drive sustainability, climate change, but also inclusion, that narrative has to change. To see trade as a bad rather than a good is not going to get us to the Paris Agreement. It's not going to get us the success we need to drive climate action. So what do we need for that to change? In the first instance, there are, and we've talked about this week in the Trade House, there's a lot of things that need to change at the trade policy level around making it easier to trade environmental goods and services, for example, breaking down barriers to opportunities that will drive climate change. But what we're really interested in ITC is the story about how do you build a just transition and a climate future where small businesses are part of the solution. And what we see, and building very much on what Thomas has said, is that one of the big challenges is that the small businesses aren't at the table, their voice isn't heard. Even in governments, often they're overlooked. In the NDCs, in the adaptation plans, we don't necessarily see the role of small business. So there's an element of looking at the interface between climate and trade from that perspective of the kind of big picture and making sure it's there. So I would say that's number one. Number two, we have to recognize that there is also a lot of landscape shifting on the trade-climate interface. So we're seeing an increasing number of regulations, a number of rules, a number of requirements that are expecting small businesses to adjust to climate action. EU Green Deal, there's also in the US, I believe, there's a growing focus on this. The intention is great, and we should be encouraging it. However, there are realities about what that means. The impacts on trade could be significant, and in many of the product areas affected, like coffee, cocoa, palm oil, these areas, smallholders are very much part of the value chain. So I think in terms of a just transition, we also need to ensure we support the changes needed at the grassroots level. Build the capabilities of business, help them to understand, build platforms that help to make these regulations a positive change and not a negative change. Very much the work that we do in ITC, obviously the platform today that was shown on the video is an example of how we're trying to showcase climate smart businesses, but also this change process. Working with actors across the value chains to find the solutions. And the solutions are here, and we'll hear from my colleague to the left about some of those ideas, those innovations for the future. But it has to be a collective responsibility, and it has to be something that's integrated at all the different levels, policy, down through capacity building in value chains, making actors work together and take responsibility together.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about what Thomas and you have said just now later on in this panel. But now we're going to go from macro to the small businesses itself. And small might not represent what you do. Your idea is huge. You're, using wasted ground coffee to make superfood. I don't think the word small business reflects how important this is. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this experience and how did it come about? Tell us, if you can, briefly about your innovation and a way of climate action.
So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. About COP MENA, what we are doing, the challenges that we are facing. For startups, challenges is quite different when it comes to business, small businesses, especially if you are operating in the MENA region. The landscape is quite different about you are operating in such a different region about the awareness about when it comes to startups. Especially if you are a climate-based startup, that's what we are suffering from, because one of the things that we have faced at the beginning when we started COP MENA back to 2019, being the first mover in the MENA region that provides solution by recycling the spent coffee grounds, the waste of coffee, and turn it into superfood and providing agricultural solution is something no one has done before in the MENA region. And that was quite challenging because there is no a guidebook that you are going to follow or the market that you are going to provide for the investor that you are going to get investment from, that there are success stories, so we are going to replicate it. No, we are doing everything by ourselves from the beginning. So that was quite a challenge for us actually to prove this for the investors, for the stakeholders, to the partners, when it comes to coffee chains that we are approaching to be able to part of our journey and being supplier and recycle their waste of coffee. So this is one of the things that we really faced at the beginning, and it took a long time from us actually to be able to prove the concept when it comes to this and be able to facilitate the process and making tractions when it comes to this. This is one of the things that we have faced at the beginning. Secondly, when it comes to startups, especially climate, financing is always an issue for us, because if you are not a technology based, so you are not returning a lot of money back for the investors, so you are not sexy for investors to be able to invest money in you, because the ROI is coming from you. It will be after 10 years, or not guaranteed actually you are going to get ROI. And for the investor, it's important actually that they make sure that the money is getting back. So lack of investment, one of the things that we was really suffering until now, even for the climate base, because most of the investors are focused on something technology based, is replicating and will exist everywhere. Maybe the impact that we are doing is bigger, but it is not important. So the lack of awareness about the balance between the profit and planet is not exist in the region specifically. So this is one of the things that it was quite challenging for us to be able to make sure that we keep going, because sometimes at the beginning, the first 2 years, we didn't make any profits or any revenues, because we just building the pilot, building the value chain for us, how it's going to be working and acquiring the partners. So it wasn't easy for us to be able to keep going without financing. So that was one of the things that we faced. And the nature of the landscape for startups, it's changing, to be honest. It wasn't like just a year or 2 years ago or 5 years. I have been working with the startups since 2017, and I can say it's changed a lot. But this is not enough actually to allow more startups to start working and facilitate the process for them to be able to work and being more represented in the region and make impact for this. So it's not easy, but it's always challenging. And a challenge is part of our job description, actually. If you didn't get any challenges, there's something wrong, yani. So this is part of the job. So we used to this, and it's fine. But if there is no ecosystem supporting you to be able to make sure you are walking on the right track, maybe sometime we will stop because we don't have the right support. But actually, support we come from ITC, for example. It's really meant for us, even to be able to show our voices for everyone that we need support, we need help for a startup. It's really mean a lot for us. So this is one of the things that want me to keep going and keep working.
So yeah, definitely the key word is challenges, and this is a good segue for you, Robin, I think. But if we can think about the challenges that have been sort of represented by Abdul Rahman and thinking of just transition, how do we overcome it?
Well, it's such a pressing issue, and to shine a lens on startups and innovation, I think, is part of the discussion about small business, because often it's sort of perceived that they're the little mom and pop shops rather than the innovators. But in fact, many of the great innovations, many of the breakthroughs are small businesses and then ultimately they become acquired and acquired and acquired. So even the ones that are the big business breakthroughs may well have started in the innovation, incubation, acceleration space. But I'd also like to shine another lens on that, which is I'm from the agri-food sector. And if you think about farmers, there are almost 1 billion farmers in the world. Each and every one of those farmers is a small business. They are part of that private sector, and they are on the absolute front line of climate change. So the agri-food sector has been discussed here as part of the problem, but is also part of the solution. The ability to sequester carbon in the soils, the ability to grow and regenerate, all lies in the power of the farming agri-food sector. And yet we see some of this variations on those challenges. Fiona spoke to that really well, that we're not doing enough to enable them to participate in value chains. And at the same time, we're seeing major value chain initiatives, whether it's on methane, whether it's on regenerative landscapes, whether it's on soil health pull-through or gender equality initiatives. I think we're going to hear more about some initiatives on the cotton side in a moment. We see lots of programming happening through the private sector trying to achieve the climate goals we need. And yet at the same time, we're burdening them with all sorts of varied and disparate compliance processes that are unattainable, particularly if you think about a smallholder farmer in a rural area. So we have to unpack that and find ways for people further up the value chain to take responsibility for some of that measurement and some of that compliance. And I think it's particularly important because we have a real false dichotomy happening in the climate discussion. We hear a lot about the solution to climate is local food. Well, the solution to all things is a mix of all systems because that's how you get resilience and solutions. We need local food production, but also local food production is one drought, one cyclone, one hurricane away from catastrophe, and in the case of agri-food, actually hunger and famine. So we have to understand that our trade system is not less important. Our trade system is more important. And we got a small taste of that during COVID, when in fact we saw food disruptions, we had challenges, but our trade system actually responded in extraordinarily nimble ways to move food to different places in different ways than it had ever been moved as ports were closing and ships were being redirected. And what we need to be doing is investing in the solutions that allow them to do that faster, be more responsive to a planet under pressure, and to create efficient trade systems that don't need wet ink documents and that allow us to digitally enable phytosanitary solutions and move our products around the world and do it through a value chain that is therefore more just, because we've understood that these burdens cannot be borne at the lowest end of that value chain. It has to be borne by the people who are higher in the value chain and not made unduly burdensome by the people in the regulating sector. Thank you.
It's fascinating how the problem is so close to the solution as well. Like farming is the problem. It creates a problem, but it's also so close to becoming the solution as well. Just needs a tweak. Lisa, no problem can be dealt with without policy, can it?
Exactly.
How can policy help with just transition?
Thank you. And thank you for the ITC to putting such a great conversation together. I think for me, policy is truly an enabler to achieve this just transition, and mainly because it will activate, if you want, across three levels. So the system level, country level, but also community level. And as it has been already mentioned, it's not just the SMEs, but it's often the farmers, the farm workers, and so many people that we often don't think about when we talk about SMEs. So I think we really need to support this kind of robust policy making to make sure it creates decent work opportunities and leaves no one behind. However, today I do think there is a too high demand on those people, and there is a need to provide for a different mechanism to support this implementation. So things like capacity strengthening, access to financing mechanism, I think is big and something we have heard throughout the 2 weeks here at COP. And of course incentives. And I think being part of the UN Business Registry that we saw before, it's really exciting, and I think that really showcases the type of solution we need to support SMEs across the world. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that there's many policies that are today crafted in the global north and impacting the global south. So I think there's also a greater need for collaboration, consultation across geographies. So moments like COP, where you have all the nations present, I think that's truly important, and I think it has to be a bit more holistic in the way it's crafted and devised, all of those policies, to make sure we actually help the people we want to help, and not just create one more demands on them.
And that's a theme, that last point about the cross-collaboration of regions for policymaking is something that I think when you go to the negotiation hearings, you hear a lot of that, not the way it's being solved yet, but at least it's being discussed. That needs to be shared more widely. Thanks, Lisa. I'll come back to you in a short while. Abdul Rahman mentioned climate finance. Many SMEs here, the ones that ITC have brought for sure, have all mentioned climate finance, Thomas. What would you say is the role for it, and how does it play such a key role?
Yeah, thank you. I'll love to talk about the finance. Both my colleague from Better Cotton talked about on the farmer side. I fully agree with you. When we tend not to think about farmers as small businesses, we think it's an own sector. I was just a couple of weeks ago in Ghana attending an inclusive insurance conference as part of our work on adaptation side. How could we help farmers, especially small-scale farmers, adapt to this, climate-induced risk that they're facing, whether it's drought and what have you. So we're thinking about creating a public-private collaboration with the microinsurance industry, how to provide, to me, insurance is a part of access to finance issue, because the better coverage that they have, they're able to access actually market-based type of things. So that's one thing. What Abdul Hamad's point around startups is critical. We have a partnership. We actually did an event 2 days ago here, Coalition for Climate Entrepreneurship, which focuses on startups. How do we, again, provide what I call an unfair advantage to startups? Because, frankly, any disruption that needs to happen for the climate change status quo will probably come from innovators. And how do we then provide those type of things, both to access to finance, access to exposure, and what have you? And so we've created these hubs in Kenya and Ghana and Vietnam, and we're about to open up in Morocco next week. So we're looking at a global approach, again, by creating the space and time that they need. But at the end of the day, exposure leads to access to finance. Because if you create credibility to these startups, then capital tends to find them, right? It's a question of credibility. So I think those are the two things. Now, beyond that, in terms of kind of mainstream capital perspective, one thing that we're seeing at the request of the U.S., we are seeing reforms at the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, the world banks, and the regional banks, in order to essentially provide financing, much needed financing, because they provide, I don't know, $60 billion, I think, the last number that I saw, in climate financing. How do we increase that? How do we make those access to capital much more flexible, much more risk-taking, and what have you? So I think we're seeing a lot of changes on that. We also have the Just Energy Transition Partnerships that are really country-led, which we're seeing. We want it to be country-led, but at the same time, how does the global capital markets able to see opportunities in some of these markets? So that essentially is, at the end of the day, the capital, the private capital mobilization, the amount of resources that are sitting idle, frankly, on the private side, whether it's sovereign wealth funds or pension funds and what have you, institutional investments, are significant. So then what are the incentives that are needed? What are the policy frameworks that needs to be created so these resources go toward the much needed innovations that we need, the much needed partnership or new business models that we need to do that? So the U.S. is working, whether working with the multi-development banks, whether with our partners, the EU and what have you. So we're looking at every framework that we can see. It is an all hands on deck approach that any entity or any sector that has capital to deploy, whether it's through even supply chain issues, right? Because we see buyers, the same thing on the climate smart network element of it, is that we want big institutions who are pledging, and platforms like COP, that they're going to be net zero by 2030. How are they going to achieve that? In order to achieve that, they're going to need suppliers to achieve that. And so these entities also could have access to capital from an off-taking arrangement perspective. So there's a lot of financial innovation that needs to happen to meet these goals. And the U.S. stands ready and continues to work in making sure that these things could become available to the market.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Climate finance is such a huge point. Fiona, but to empower small businesses, would you say this is the only element that empowers small businesses to take climate action?
Well, I think it's a little bit chicken and egg. I think it's like you say, we have to kind of create the conditions where businesses can access finance. And part of that is about promoting their visibility, building capacity, and helping them to adapt to the practices that they need to. So I wanted to just give a couple of maybe concrete examples of the kinds of things we're doing. So obviously what we saw the video on, the work, Climate Smart Network, showcasing businesses that have taken action, that are building their innovations and their credibility so that they can say, yes, if you work with this business in the supply chain, they have the credentials. What we need to make sure is those credentials also reflect what's being demanded in the market. So that is a process that also in ITC, we own the sustainability map, which has sustainability standards covering like 300 plus different standards, and making sure that we provide that kind of missing middle of understanding about how these standards link with what the markets are demanding, what the businesses are, but also some of the new regulations, making them fit for purpose and harmonizing as well. So I think part of that is simplifying the landscape. Bringing that down, an example, a really, really powerful example is some work that we have been doing to actually test what the impact of some of the new EU due diligence regulations are, which touch on climate and on human rights and different areas. And we've been working with cocoa farmers in Ghana, and working with them to build alliances to look at what does a participatory due diligence process look like. They were baffled when we first arrived and started talking about these new requirements. But by working with them, by raising awareness, by looking at what the role of different actors were, like the Cocoa Board, we work with an organization that has reach across many, many cocoa farmers, a cooperative, and helping them to find the solutions. And that's led to some really amazing innovations as well, moving into areas like dynamic agroforestry, diversifying their income streams, looking at ways that they can tick the right standards but also enhance their incomes. And then the other empowerment piece I think that's critical is to support the future Kupmena, to inspire and innovate. For me, the youth are the future. The climate future depends on young people. They are the change agents, and a lot of the ecopreneurs that we are nurturing are really coming up with the amazing ideas. So we're actually doing a lot of work now around, we've just launched this week an ecopreneurship program with the G20 Land Restoration as a partner, where we're going to be providing funding, providing boot camps, providing accelerators, and really showcasing some of these businesses. Sorry, I could talk forever, as you know.
I'm sure we all can.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Not only you, Fiona, we all can. This is such a fascinating subject. But you've really helped me with my segue back to Abdul Rahman, talking about the future, talking about young entrepreneurs. When you look at your own journey and your lessons, the lessons you've learned and the challenges you've faced, what do you take away to sort of talk to others like you who haven't started taking climate action? What do you tell them? What's that message to the others who need to start taking climate action?
So the motive for anyone who's starting like a climate-based solution or startup related to environment is not something that maybe the issue that he's been through. Sorry. So he wants to solve it. So this is always a motive for us. It's not something that we found that issue in our community and we are willing to create a startup to solve it. The journey is not going to be easy. So this is something you should be aware of. If I remember that my mentor, before I start my company, he told me it's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. You are going to suffer a lot. So you maybe sometimes you will not have a social life. You have to be dedicated for your business. So it wasn't easy at all. But otherwise, I was still able to go through in this learning. Actually, this was reflecting a lot to my personality, the way that I deal with things. So I say that the journey is going to be long and tough, but you are willing to be able to learn from it through it. and you will find a lot of challenges that you are going to solve and be able to interact with it. So be resilient with what you are doing, what you are going to have, and be adaptable is something that is essential for any entrepreneur. Otherwise, whether you are tech entrepreneur or ecopreneur. So this is something that you should be like flexible with the solution, with the issues that you are going to fix it, to find it and to be fixed, and be able to keep going within the route, because the journey is going to be long and tough. So this is the thing that is really, maybe I could say it to myself 5 years ago before I started my company.
Thank you. And Robin, when you hear his experience and how's it going, how do you incorporate that, or what's your own experience into sort of the broader picture, like you were saying from your farmer sort of background? How we widen this experience into a broader message?
Well, I think that Fiona touched on this extremely well, and then we heard it at a micro level, right? The entrepreneurship journey and my own entrepreneurship journey has had its moments along the way, but one of the great things about farming is it's a multi-generational entrepreneurship journey, which I think in some ways is more complicated, yet really helps to prepare you for that. But when we look at what's happening in our seeking of climate justice, I think we're at real risk of creating injustice at the same time. And that's because of these gaps that I was talking about earlier and that others have touched on. In terms of the regulations, the standards, the things we're hoping to do and the changes that we're expecting are being put on the people who may be the least able to pay for some of those adjustments. And I think one of the challenges while we're talking about change in climate finance is that there's some really profound and concerning gaps in it. At many levels. One is the speed of the process, right, is just not adequate. The expectations about the data, how do we expect South Sudan to supply 50 years of soil degradation data to apply for a GCF fund? I mean, it's just unrealistic about some of the things that we put in place for due diligence, to fully respect the importance of due diligence. But at some point, we need to understand that the people who need access to funds may have the least access to funds. And you talked about the missing middle, Fiona, and I think it's just so important. Almost all of these projects need millions of dollars to be available for funding. We're working a lot on inequality in terms of gender in agriculture. We see great women entrepreneurs in Africa, some of whom have access to microfinance because we focused on that. You should all be aware that microfinance office means 25 to 30% interest. So I'm not sure how much those $1,500 loans really are doing the right thing by those people. But beyond that, if you move up to somebody who needs a $50,000 loan or a $250,000 loan or even $1 million loan in Africa to build a small processing facility that's going to help support that farmer's ecosystem, they cannot get it. Nobody is doing that. And thank goodness ITC is at least helping on some of the technical support around compliance issues, but we need to fund into technical support on compliance issues, and we have to take some of this climate money and make it accessible to breakthrough entrepreneurs, and we have to make it accessible to people who have the least equality, and we need to do it urgently. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I'm really interested in hearing a bit more about Better Cotton, and how has your journey been to make it sort of to try to achieve the net zero sort of carbon transition?
Definitely. Thank you. Well, I mean, I will go back to your point that agriculture is a problem. I would say that it's not about to become a solution. It is already a solution. I think what we need is just supports to scale and to really reach all the different people we're trying to support. But in terms of our climate approach is really threefold. We really believe that it's important to look at both mitigation and adaptation together, and of course with just transition to make sure it's truly effective. So for us, we have a target of reducing our GHG emissions by 50% before 2030, and we truly believe that will be a great effort for to over 2 million farmers we are working with, but also it will give them tremendous opportunities in terms of unlocking carbon finance. And that's something we are working hard on at the moment in terms of GHG accounting, understanding how can we really put this mechanism in place so then it can really become a commodity for farmers and unlock new opportunities for them, and also greater incentives. And I think it goes back to what you were saying. We can't just expect them to add so many, audits and changes and adopt all those new practices. I think they want to, but we need to have I would say, support that is attainable, right? So that's it.
Thank you. So I'm so glad that we're all sort of landing our points in a very concise way, because that allows us to have another point, another round. But yes, of course. Please do. No, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the points made about climate finance, because in the last week I've attended so many different panels and discussions, and we see the numbers rolling, loss and damage numbers, etc. on the pots of finance. We hear the different funds. The money is there, but I can't agree more. It's not reaching down to small business. So it's really a call for all those involved in climate finance to try and think differently. The message we've had from so many businesses, our support organisations, there are so many solutions there already to build on, to scale, to develop. But one of the big challenges is accessing the finance. So how can we do this differently? It's like we can't have 2 years of accreditation for organisations to get access to climate finance. It has to be done differently. And I would say that if there's anything that needs to change, as well as, in the negotiations, the transition needs to have more linkage with small business. But in the climate finance, there need to be accelerators to get money down to small business. Sorry, I feel really strongly this week, from having heard so much, like, we've got the building blocks, but actually we need to, or as somebody said, we've got all the seeds, we need to water them and let the plants grow.
Yeah, no, there's a really valid point. Thomas, would you like to sort of add something to this?
I'll take a different route because I think there is a lot of conversation. Because at the end of the day, the essence of trade, I've seen a lot of trade conversations, it all goes toward jobs, because trade provides opportunities for jobs. Because when we have conversations around entrepreneurship and innovation, we tend to focus with folks like what we have, amazing creative folks who do that. But one of the number one things these people need is talent. So there's also a concurrent conversations that need to happen from a support system perspective on workforce development. If the next generation of creative and new ideas going to come, which talent is going to take, who's going to help him make his ideas come to true? So I think there has to be a concurrent conversation aside from entrepreneurship, because frankly, when it comes to startups, the failure rate in startups is also high, right? And not everybody could be an entrepreneur. So significant amount of the world's population are essentially folks who are job seeking. Not all of them can be entrepreneurs. So in this cutting edge new stuff that needs to happen, I think the donor community, governments, policymakers need to be thinking about workforce development. How do we create the talent that is needed so the new ideas come up? They have access to talent. Because without talent, the products that you want do not come up. So it just becomes a cyclical. So sometimes I don't want us to be talking about evangelizing just about entrepreneurship. It's also workforce development.
Robin, how do we support small businesses?
Well, supporting small businesses has to start by giving them access to resources, right? We've talked about that. And part of that resource is a market for trade. And I'll throw out one other texture we haven't had a chance to touch on. And I see a colleague here from the animal health sector, so I'll use an example from that sector, but we can talk about it in the context of seeds or gene editing or all sorts of things. But we also need them to be able to access some of the things that we know are working. So where we do have successes in new products and they can be innovative of new food products that need food safety certifications, or it could be something like animal health, where we know that smallholders actually need access to animal vaccines so that they're not having animals that are inefficient, that are emitting but not producing, that they're in a situation that pastoral communities are stressed, and that we're seeing social unrest in parts of the world where that stress is so great that it's causing conflict, which then exacerbates these problems. So if we empower these communities to have access to some of the new things by looking at how are we approving the breakthrough technologies that allow people to get new things into market, how are we letting the innovators get to places not just in the developed world, there are built out regulatory systems, but we can help regulatory systems globally to be more effective. And I think that's really important, that we actually get tools in those hands, because you said so well, Lisa, farmers really are willing to make change. People talk about them as unwilling to make change. Sometimes they're just not enabled to make change because they have these financial burdens. They don't have access to tools, or we're expecting the people in rural, poor areas to be the ones who can confront those risks, when in fact, if we help them manage risk through good tools like insurance that doesn't let that animal die, but actually buys the feed in the middle of a drought and doesn't destroy a whole community that way. And we can replicate that. And when we talk about horticulture, crops, or all sorts of problems that we have, we really need those solutions to flow.
Lisa, what else can we throw into this mix right now?
I mean, I will probably go back to policy. I think there's a lot on that, and on the social side, we have seen a lot of progress related to living wages, and I would say it's really important to look also at living income, because a lot of those smallholder farmers are actually their own bosses, right? So they don't have a wage. So I think we have to look at it in a more holistic way, and to make sure we really not just lift people out of poverty, but give them a really decent and thriving life.
Thank you. And before I'm going to come to you, Abdul Rahman, we're going to invite Peter Tishansky from the Business Council for International Understanding in a minute. And I think a lot of the points that have been raised so far, I think will segue really interestingly into your area of expertise. Abdul Rahman, after hearing all our panelists on these points, especially in this last round, what does that make you think as a small business?
There is a major thing that I appreciate the effort that helping the startups around the world, but there is a major something missing that actually was pushing me myself to be able to work for an NGO, international NGO, supporting entrepreneurs in vulnerable communities, to supporting them. One of the things that the program that designed for startups, entrepreneurs, are not hearing from entrepreneurs about the real issues that they are facing. So it's important to have someone inside with entrepreneurial mind to be able to have been through what they have been through, to be able to provide the right support. I worked for an NGO for 6 months consultancy. I was able to provide, I was able to listen the issues. Yeah, I have been through this. I know how I can achieve this and fix it to this. And by this way, we were able to provide more affordable products that's solving the issue for entrepreneurs. Maybe not about money, but there is a small tricky issues that they're facing and need the support out of it. So it's important to hear from them and know what they really want, because issues change from time to time, challenges change from community to community or region. So it's important to understand and know what they are going through to be able to provide the right prescription or the right support for them to be able to thrive and do the impact for the world.
Thank you, Abdul Rahman. I want to invite members of the audience to start thinking of any questions that you might have. It would be really good to hear from you as well. Peter, if you may. We've got Peter Tishansky from the BCIU. He's going to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. You know, the American civil rights leader, the late Martin Luther King, had many spectacular quotations, and one that's very useful is the term he used, which was the fierce urgency of now. And when I think about, you know, trying to beat the clock in terms of, you know, mitigating the climate crisis, it's really overwhelming. And so our commitment, which I'd like to make today, is that given our ability at BCIU, which I'll explain in a moment, if anyone in the room can present us with an SME that's ready to be introduced to a global supply chain of a large multinational, by this time next year at the next COP, I'd like to be able to report that we've succeeded. So we can probably absorb about maybe 30, 50 of those suggested SMEs ready to scale by virtue of being introduced into a global supply chain like a Walmart, for example. So again, like when you think about the recent examples that were made here about Ghana and how powerful technology has been through one touch of a screen or text on a flip phone, the fishermen off of Winneba who are trying to figure out where they can get the best price that day for fish, know what they're doing. But what those of us, I think, that have the ability to help them scale, we really have to be humble about what links could we help them make so that there's refrigeration available, perhaps, or processing of food, processing of fish near the port in Winneba on the coast in Ghana. It's very complex, but for sure, I think if SMEs can get beyond the short-termism that they have to live with every day, because of advocates like yourselves who can stick with them and help, grow them in terms of their capacities. And then that last kilometer or last mile, as we say, is, how to give them purchase orders ultimately. And it's an exciting life cycle. And again, because of our, I think, reputation as a not-for-profit that has access to large multinationals, we love to be able to. It's the most satisfying thing that we go through is if we can help a small business, live to see the next day in a way. So we'd love to be challenged with that. I'd like to make that commitment again that if anyone knows of SMEs, I'd love to talk to their owners, CEOs, shop floor managers, or whoever to see if we can help one step at a time, one case at a time, help achieve some success. So I just want to thank you for the invitation, for the partnership that the Business Council has with ITC and with the State Department. So I just wanted to make those thoughts, share those thoughts, and the fierce urgency of now does, it really haunts all of us. And as I said, we're a New York-based global business ecosystem that likes to be tasked. So we love to hear from anyone that, we have a hard time hearing about the whining or woe is me, but like the very practical, here's what I do, here's what I think I need, and whether that's helping them with, business planning or introductions, this is really what keeps us at BCIU, and it's worthy. So thank you very much for the chance.
Thank you, Peter. Okay. We'll do that at the end, I'm sure. Oh, well, we'll get at the end, for sure. I would like to open it to the audience. We've heard quite a few points here. Would there be any questions that anyone would like to ask to our panelists? We have a question at the back, please. And if you can tell us who you are, so we can know.
Thank you. My name is Sonny Jumbi. I'm coming from Cameroon. I'm the coordinator of Support Mighty Cameroon.
Welcome.
Mine is not a question, it's a contribution to the second panelist to my right.
That would be Robin.
I came in a bit late, so I didn't get her name. I work with the indigenous pastoralist communities and local communities in Cameroon to restore degraded ecosystems. I was so impressed to understand that you also support initiatives like this and you support such initiatives with technology. this is very important because I feel that in as much as we value and valorize indigenous knowledge, it's important that we complement this with technology. I don't doubt what contribution technology can actually make, or the transformation that technology can actually make in the lives of indigenous people, in the lives of smallholder farmers. So I believe, personally, I believe in the strength of capacity building, and I believe that this is a welcome initiative, especially for organizations working in frontline communities like us. So I'll be happy to learn more and to know more about these existing technologies and how we can partner or collaborate with you to have this initiative to grassroots communities in Cameroon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as we're about to sort of finish our conversation today, maybe we'll have a small response to this intervention, and then we close it.
Well, my name is Robin Anderson. I would be happy to come and chat with you at the end. And I think that there are so many great interventions, and all of them must be done with respect for the people who are actually working the land and who are managing the animals. And I think it's not, again, it's a false dichotomy, just as I said earlier about local versus trade. It's a false dichotomy to say that we only need traditional knowledge and we only need innovation, or that we only can have innovation, we can't respect what's happening locally. I think that pairing is the power of our path forward out of these problems we're facing. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much to our panel, to Lisa, Robin, Abdul Rahman, Fiona, Thomas, and Peter. Thank you for being here.